はい。皆さん、こんにちは。今日は、翻訳者とか、弁理士とか、あ、今日のセミナー、のためにです。Today's topic is what is a claim feature as compared with a claim element, and this definition of claim feature is directed towards um, it's the usefulness of a feature in presenting an argument to an examiner or to a court, for example. Right. When it's most important, making sure we know what a claim feature is. So, of course, it is easy to identify a claim element in an element by element style claim. This is the most common claim style in the United States, at least on the mechanical and electrical side. But there, as far as I know, there is no standard definition of a claim feature. 例えば, it is easy to agree there is at least one feature to the element of a processing unit configured to process sensor data to produce an output. But how many features are there? Well, it depends on our definition. In my view, a claim feature is any group of words in a claim that defines a structure or further clarifies a relationship. And so maybe there are four features in the above element. For example, there's a processing unit. There's a processing unit configured to process sensor data. There's sorry, it's very hard to see this little dot. A processing unit to produce an output. And I think that's three. Oh, and of course, there's the whole one, a processing unit configured to process sensor data to produce an output. Typically, that might focus more on process sensor data to produce an output, right? What's the relationship between the sensor data and the output? Or maybe there's only three elements, right? Maybe there's no, or three features. Maybe there's no way to really claim a processing unit, and this should have said processor. I mean, there's a way to claim it. Maybe there's no real structure to it. So the words of a feature are not necessarily consecutive in the claim, as we saw. So, for example, a processing unit to produce an output is a completely fine feature. Why do I write it this way? Um, it helps focus the examiner's attention on a particular, or a court's attention on a particular aspect. ちょっと待って。すみません. Um, it focuses on the production of the output. This example is very basic, but when we have long recitations in a claim, we can really clarify which part we believe the examiner is overlooking. We show these omissions by using these three dots. We call them ellipses, egode. But when we omit words from one or more elements, we must be careful not to change the original meaning, right? So, for example, if you manipulate the um, element on the previous slide, you could say a processing unit configured to process an output, but that actually changes the meaning. We don't do that. So please do not do that. So this is going to be a real challenge if you are working in a foreign language, right? Um, I'm thinking to my Japanese um, practice questions, and if I had to do this in there, it would not be pretty. I would not do well at all. All right, let's do some examples. Ichiban. Not every word signifies a feature. Okay. In this example, the word received is not an additional feature in my um, under my definition. And I think that's actually consistent, right? While I'm saying this, I'm thinking about, for example, how abstract ideas are discussed at the USPTO and how we sometimes refer to additional features. And this is completely consistent with that definition, right? Received is not an additional feature. Naze. So the data here is already received by the interface at the top of the claim. So the claim has the identical meaning, not just similar, the identical meaning without the word received here. Well, what hang on, I'm trying to erase the ink. Okay. What is the role of received? Well, it's just operating as a label to identify the data. Okay, yeah, it's easy for a human to understand. It clarifies it for a human, but it doesn't really clarify what is the data. It's the same data it was without the word received. And if we're thinking about what this means, in our head, maybe we're thinking like this, right? The apparatus is in red, an interface receives data, and then we somehow process data within the apparatus with the processor. Okay, no surprises, very straightforward. Brian, still, I have a question. Like I said, there's a former audience member that used to ask questions like this all the time. And he might say something like, Brian, I haven't a graduate degree in English. And I've been speaking English for 20 years. Here, received is in the past tense. It means the data that was received. Um, and and that's not necessarily true. I mean, that's certainly possible, but couldn't received mean that the data is to be received, right? The data that is eventually received. Um, and the reason I'd point to it like that is that American claims are not interpreted in a chronological or time order. Okay, and therefore it's not clear in the claim whether the received data is something that occurs first, that the data is received first, like in our previous example, or if it's something that occurs later. What would that look like? Here's an example, right? In this case, the in English we'd say the twist is that there's a special acknowledgement packet that's sent that shows what data was received, includes the data that was received, the exact same data. It might include other things too, of course. And that's this example, right? On the left side, you can see we process data, right? A processor that processes data. It processes received data, and then the interface transmits the data. That's not shown in claim one, but maybe that's in claim two, or maybe that's nowhere in the claims. And then we receive an acknowledgement packet including the same data that was processed. We can't tell, and you don't see this type of rejection very frequently at the USPTO, but I'll tell you, I see it maybe 10% of the time. If it's a good primary examiner, you're much more likely to see this. Maybe it jumps to like about, 1/3 of the time. Primary examiner, good ones make this kind of rejection far more frequently because this, I don't want to say error, this hole in a claim um, occurs fairly frequently. It's just most examiners don't know that they can present a good rejection based on this. But a good primary examiner knows, and they're much more likely to do this. Niban. Even a small word can change the meaning, can form a feature. In the example on the right, there is no relationship between the two values under broadest reasonable interpretation, right? So we've got a value here, we've got a value here. I have no idea, based on this claim, what this relationship is supposed to be. Can they be the same? Yes, of course they can be the same. However, they can also be related somehow. One can be the basis for computing the other. They can be completely independent, right? Maybe the proper amendment is a first value and a second value. I don't know. It's not clear based on this claim. If we now change it so that the word a becomes the word the, that's what we're showing here is an amendment. This creates a relationship between the two values, okay? So now the two values must be the same, even under broadest reasonable interpretation. Again, that's the standard we apply in understanding claims at the USPTO. Um, you know, I can already hear questions of Brian, my examiner didn't interpret it this way. Examiners make this mistake all the time. In that case, it's more of a junior examiner mistake. Sometimes you see it from primaries. And you can present arguments on this point. You can present successful arguments on this point. Um, you can present successful arguments to a primary examiner who understands that they made a mistake and they'll still insist that they are correct. And you have to kind of figure out what you want to do about it. There's a lot of a good patent prosecutor, American patent prosecutor can assess this type of situation. Um, but this is a good argument. I mean, you should make this argument. It should be successful. You can win on appeal. I'm not suggesting that you appeal. Um, but this is proper. This is correct. So again, the word the here clarifies the relationship between the two values. Just one little word. And this is a feature. It's absolutely a feature of this claim. And it looks small, right? It's similar to the difference between wa and ga in Japanese. Sanban. Um, Today doesn't really concern it, but I wanted to make the point because maybe a future seminar will address this topic more. There's an aspect of strength to each feature, and so some claim features are stronger or weaker than others. In the example on the right, this word image is a feature because it defines a structure. What is the structure? It's the image data. That has to be a thing. Brian, what's image data? That's why it's weak, is I don't know. Tsuyokunayo. Um, it's probably um, maybe it's a bitmap image, maybe it's a JPEG image, maybe it's a GIF, maybe it's a video could be image data, or PDF, or if you're um, becoming an older guy like me, maybe it's an ANSI, ANSI image. It's anything that's an image data. We don't really know what that structure is, but it should relate somehow to an image data because we know image data is probably different than, for example, audio data. But the feature itself is fairly weak because we don't know what that means. I guess maybe the real reason I'm introducing this here is that on the next slide, we're going to see a an example that's too weak. So this is a weak feature that's I'm sorry, this is a weak I guess it's a weak feature that's still a feature. On the next slide, we'll see something that's so weak that I don't really consider it a feature. All right, Yonban. This one, our feature is going to be associated with content on the right side. And I'm going to tell you that's not even a feature. Well, as written, it defines the content ID, right? It's a content ID associated with content. So this associated with content is supposed to be a feature of the content ID. Well, why not, right? It looks like a feature. Well, in this example, the dominant feature is a processor configured to determine the content based on the content ID. Okay, this the second one in green. Midori Yoroi. Um, this portion really defines and further clarifies the content ID. Brian, what's a content ID? It's the basis for determining the content. Okay. And so we don't really, so this aspect of associated with content doesn't really have any meaning anymore because it's dominated by this the determination of the content based on the content ID. All right, fine. But what if the applicant has another association in mind, right? Well, how is that going to be possible? Well, maybe we have a claim two. And here the network interface transmits a packet, including a header and a payload. And the header includes the content ID and the payload includes the content, right? So maybe this is the association, is that they are the data that are in the packet that gets transmitted. Right, so could the associated with content refer to the structure of the packet in claim two? Yes. Demo associated with up here, the top, in claim one, covers any association between the content ID and the content. So even if there are two relationships, this association still applies. It's not clear what it applies to, right? It covers any association between the content ID and the content. And so even if the applicant thinks, Brian, the association I want is the one in the packet, it doesn't matter because this determination can establish an association. If maybe in Japan or China or Europe, if you look in the specification, it says this association is the one in the packet. It probably doesn't matter at the USPTO. We will say that, I mean, unless you present arguments to the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, um, your examiner will tell you it's this determination that it's broad enough to cover this as well, and therefore it has no additional meaning. It's not a real feature here. It no longer associated with content no longer defines or further clarifies the content ID. And so I would delete this from my claims. If I had sometimes applicants let me do whatever I want, and I'll just take that out because it's not helping. It's further limiting the claim somehow, not much, but somehow in a way that does not help. In our final example, Goban, is there's an issue of languages conveying different information. Um, for example, computers commonly have multiple processors. And so how many processors are discussed on the portion on the right, processor wa, we don't know. And I don't know how to explain this. I mean, some people easily understand it, some people don't. It doesn't mean that people are wrong. It's just I'm have very limited ability to explain what I mean. In Japanese, the sentences carry different information than in English. It's possible to translate, of course, but if you look at English and Spanish, for example, Spaingo, the sentences not always, but often carry almost the exact same information. And so it's just a question of, or it's closer information. So it's less of a translation task to change languages. But Japanese and English carry the sentences just have different information. Like you have to actually like change the sentence to convey the same information. So I gave this seminar once, and my colleague said, "Oh, Brian, we can say like Fukusu no processor," and yeah, you could say processor Tachi, but people don't always do that, right? Especially native speakers. I mean, I don't speak English perfectly. I speak it natively. Native speakers don't speak their language according to a textbook. And so, people, maybe some Benrishi won't use Fukusu. I don't know. Or maybe they don't use processor Tachi. I don't, I can't say because I'm not a native speaker and I don't know what, um, Nihongo kara Eigo made Honyakusha see. I don't know what, the native claims look like when they get translated. And so you're going to see this issue where if you're trying to match the features of the original Japanese claim to the features of a translated English claim, it's going to carry different information. It's not the same. You have to add things, sometimes you leave things out, like the languages use convey different information. It can be understood, but the information itself is not, it's not one to one. I don't, there's probably many translators laughing right now because they realize that I understand now the magic that they do. And there's probably people who think I'm crazy because it sounds so strange, but it's absolutely true. You don't, there's, the information gets changed when it moves across the languages. It has the same meaning, but the words change. You know, I don't know. Ite koremasen ka is just will you go in English. And if you ch took, you know, ikimasu ka, that's just will you go. But of course, they're quite different in Japanese, but in English, they have the exact same translation, and that translation is exactly right for both. If I were a professional translator, maybe I would take more care, but as a native speaker, that's both are exactly right. And so that's what I mean. They convey different information. And so you will see, or I expect that you will see different information in a English claim. And that's the whole point of today is that the features are different once they move across languages. Thank you very much. ありがとうございます。